Welcome, everyone. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Cas Coovadia, the B20 South Africa Sherpa, and a key voice in shaping the dialogue around inclusive economic growth, particularly as the Global South takes on an increasingly influential role in the world economy. Mr. Coovadia has been actively engaged in the BRICS Business Forum in Rio de Janeiro, where leaders and business minds have gathered to discuss collaboration, innovation, and the shifting dynamics of global trade and development. Mr. Coovadia, thank you for joining us here today. We want to get your thoughts on the reflection of the forum and what it means for South Africa and the broader African continents. From your engagement there, what key insights and transformative discussions stood out to you, not just for South Africa, but for BRICS countries as a collective?
Thanks for having me. So my engagement there was a very brief one. I was only there on the Saturday, but we did host, together with Boston Consulting Group, the BRICS Business Council, CNI, the biggest business organization in Brazil that's organizing the BRICS Business Council, and others, to host a breakfast on the day of the summit. And at the breakfast, what became quite clear was that the BRICS Business Council Forum is taking place at a time when the world is in an interesting place. The geopolitics are tough. America is taking certain positions that are causing some ructions in other parts of the world. And that while we can lament these issues, that it's also an opportunity for the global south to actually position itself far more effectively. So I think that was the one message that came through. The other message that came through during the course of the day was that, again, conurbations like BRICS, which have a significant part of economic growth and economic development and a significant number of growing economies within it, now have the opportunity to increase intra-BRICS trade and investment, to look at the strengths of each of the BRICS countries and leverage of those strengths for the BRICS bloc itself, but also to see how it works together to position the BRICS bloc as a serious agglomeration of countries with serious economic growth, countries that have good reserves of minerals that are required across the world, have good reserves of renewable energy, have good land and agricultural capability that can address the food security problems in the world. And this is an opportunity for BRICS to position itself along those lines.
Where do you see the biggest gaps between ambition and implementation in BRICS-Africa collaboration?
Well, I think the one is that I think BRICS has been talking quite a lot about a BRICS currency and a BRICS payment system and a BRICS rating agency. I think that the gap is that we should be concentrating more on intra-BRICS trade and investment, on the back of which the other stuff will come. So I think that's the one gap. The other gap is that BRICS nations are obviously interacting with African countries in different ways, and that's good, and that should continue. But the other gap is that Africa itself, perhaps through the AU, needs to organize itself a bit better to, on certain aspects, so for multilateral trade rules and multilateral trade standards and so on, Africa should be able to come together to negotiate as a continent. And I think that we need to do some work to actually pull ourselves together. There was a lot of discussion about the infrastructure gap and the need for funding for infrastructure. And there were the view that places in Africa, there's some things we can get together on and actually collaborate on having common standards, common regulations for certain things, ensure that we are transparent about the way we do business and so on. And so create the conditions for that investment. And I think that that's something that Africa needs to address. But having said all of that, I think that there was also so clear position that Africa is the next frontier. It has tremendous mineral wealth. It can take care of the food security problem of the world. It can contribute to renewable energy, and all of these are opportunities. And that an investment in Africa is not just for Africa's growth and development; it's for the world's growth and development. And so those are issues that we should be looking at, despite the gaps. but Africa needs to do some work to fill those gaps.
How can African businesses better position themselves to attract BRICS-led investments?
Well, again, there are some. I mean, South Africa is the most diversified economy on the continent, and South Africa has global corporations that should be able to negotiate both with BRICS governments and businesses in BRICS to actually attract investment. But again, I think through some of the regional blocks on the continent, so through SADC, those structures should be concentrating on what are the economic opportunities in those structures and should start again looking at commonalities and seeing if as those structures they can negotiate with BRICS countries and businesses in BRICS countries to actually attract investment. I don't think the country-to-country negotiations should stop, because I think despite all efforts and despite the fact that we do need to coordinate and collaborate on certain things as a continent, I don't think we should stop countries from using their own competitive advantages to attract investment. And they should do that, and they should continue to, and we should compete against each other as countries to do that. But I think to coordinate around the broader stuff, to coordinate around creation of the environment for investment, I think all that we can do as a continent. But businesses on the continent, I think, will be enabled to grow if some of the impediments to business growth are taken care of, like logistics, like power and electricity, like good governance and good regulations. And I think that what holds back businesses sometimes are that those things aren't in place. So there's sufficient business-to-business activity happening between businesses on the continent and businesses in BRICS. But I think that we just need to look for areas of coordination on the continent to create the environment, and then we need to ensure that we enable businesses on the continent to grow by getting rid of unnecessary regulation and creating appropriate regulatory environments.
Response. So, gotta ask, when you're up at 3 a.m. worrying about BRICS-Africa progress, what's the one stubborn problem that keeps you awake? Is it logistics, politics, or something that nobody actually talks about?
Well, I think if you look at Africa itself, I think logistics are obviously a critical issue. I think that skilling of our youth is a critical issue, because we have a youth dividend, but that youth dividend can turn into a youth problem if we don't skill our young people to participate in what is a changing economy. And so we've got to skill our young people in what sort of jobs are necessary and what sort of skills are necessary in a digitalized economy, working with AI to a certain extent. Countries in Africa are leapfrogging that and doing some excellent work on that. I think that we need to ensure that we demonstrate that we are able to protect people's investments when they come into our country, that people are able to repatriate dividends, that we create the environment for such investment. But I think we also need to, in our negotiations for such investments, ensure that we're not a begging bowl. We've got significant opportunities to offer, and that's what we're looking for investment for. And if we grow those opportunities, there's also benefit for other countries and benefit for the globe generally. And that should be the offer that we make to investors. So I think it's those sort of issues that we need to deal with some of the problems we have, the logistics, power, skilling of our youth, but also promote the opportunities we have, not just for the continent, but for the world.
If you could sit down with a small business owner struggling to trade across African borders, what's the one piece of practical advice you'd give them to take advantage of these new continental trade rules? What's working that more people should know about?
Well, I think small businesses themselves and entrepreneurs, to a certain extent, have the answers of what they need to do cross-border trade and so on. I think what's happening is that the regulatory environment and some of the governance issues are stopping them from doing that. And so I would certainly advise a small entrepreneur to persevere, but to also try to find other entrepreneurs with whom to coordinate. And I think small and medium enterprises need to advocate far more effectively for what they need from governments to actually enable them to grow their business and do their business. So I would certainly advise any entrepreneur, particularly in a small and medium environment, to understand exactly what their business is, to understand what their competitive advantage is, and what they need to actually grow those businesses. Then to, again, look at competition with other small and medium businesses, but also look at collaborating with other small and medium businesses to, again, negotiate with governments and others to develop a platform off the back of which small and medium businesses can do business, can go cross-border, and can then compete with each other to grow.
I do have to ask, because I've done a lot of research into the new development bank, and I know that's becoming, a cornerstone of the BRICS collaboration with projects like renewable energy, transport corridors, transforming communities across Africa. From your perspective, what makes the bank uniquely positioned to address African development challenges compared to traditional institutions?
Well, I think the critical point is that the new development bank has been established by BRICS and understand the environment in which it is lending the money. And that's the other issue that has come up recently. I mean, before BRICS, I was in Seville for the Financing for Development conference. And there, what was the constant message was that we need to push back against the way countries in Africa are rated from a risk point of view. And there's a premium placed on the risk of countries in Africa. And Sim Shabalala, who was on one of the panels in Seville, made the point that there's a bigger risk premiums on some such countries in Africa than there is in Bosnia. And that just doesn't make sense. So I think that rating agencies have not bothered, quite honestly, to understand the environment that is Africa, have not bothered to manage risk that does pertain, but have also not bothered to look at the opportunities. And so I think that what the new development bank does is still manages their money properly, makes responsible investments, but understands the environment much better and interacts with the environment much better. And I think that's why it's able to actually invest in countries in Africa. It also, I think, is able to understand that what the opportunities are in Africa. So if you invest in logistics and you sort out the logistics problems, it unblocks significant opportunity of export of goods and services from the continent to other parts of the world. It makes intra-African trade far more possible and increases the intra-African trade, which is much lower than if you look at the EU and other places. So that's why I think the NDB is able to do what some of its comparator banks, development banks in other parts of the world are not able to do. And so I think that what's happening now is that some of the rating agencies, I think, are beginning to see this. They're beginning to see that the way they've been rating countries in Africa is actually cutting off opportunities for potential investors. And so Moody's, for instance, is expanding on the continent, and they've said they're expanding because they want to understand the environment that they're rating, which essentially says that up to now they haven't understood it. So I think that's why the NDB is more successful than some of the other developers.
In your day-to-day work, between BRICS and B20, what's the one stubborn old rule about global trade or finance that you're determined to change? And how will that specifically help South African businesses and workers potentially?
Well, look, let me just clarify. I'm not really involved in the work of BRICS. I went to the BRICS Business Forum essentially to promote the B20. So my full-time job this year is on the B20. But having said that, I think that again, the B20 this year is also happening at a pivotal time. One, we're absolutely clear that it's got to be an African B. And second, it's happening at a time when there are parts of the globe that are becoming protectionist in their approach. There are parts of the globe that are pulling back from multilateral organizations that actually we believe are quite important. So I think for the B20, the critical issues here, and we're the fourth global south country that's hosting the B20 consecutively. Indonesia, India, Brazil, and ourselves. So our obligations are, one, to promote the opportunities in Africa, and then through the recommendations we make to the G20 and these are policy recommendations on the environment that needs to be created for businesses to prosper, to also in those recommendations reflect what needs to be done and how Africa needs to be looked at, and an opportunity and not as some sort of a locality where you can't actually manage risk and you have to put a risk premium. I think that it also gives us the opportunity to look at how we do things differently at the G20 and businesses in the G. So if you look at things like tariffs from the US is putting tariffs on countries in the EU as well as countries in Africa. So that creates opportunities for EU and Africa to sit down and have different conversations. How do we together manage the impact of those tariffs? So it opens up the opportunities for different alignments, for different conversations, and I think that enables a continent like Africa to actually have discussions with the EU that actually increase investment from the EU into the continent. So I think that B20 is essentially that sort of an initiative, a policy development initiative, and we make recommendations to the G. We want to consolidate some of the positions of the Global South before we hand over to America at the end of this year. And so that's what we're working to do, and we're working to actually enable some of the priorities of the Global South to be on the table as America takes over the B20, as it does the G20 next year, so that some of those are very much high on the agenda and we can promote them.
Anything that you are taking towards the G20 that will influence it in any way? Is there any way that you are able to influence any decisions that are brought up within that this year?
Yeah, so one of the problems of the B20 has been that you have these policy discussions that move from one B20 to the other, and nobody tracks whether the recommendations are implemented, and nobody tracks whether there's any impact from those recommendations being implemented. So what we want to do this year is, firstly, we want to make sure that our recommendations are messaged in a way that they are implementable and actionable. So we'll say, here's the issue, here's the recommendation, this is who should implement it, and usually it's a multilateral organization like the World Bank or the WTO or whoever. And this is the period of time over it should be implemented. We've been talking to the American Chamber of Commerce in Washington, to whom we hand over, and they are happy to, when they host, to also track whether it's implemented. And then once the host for the 2027 B20 is announced, and I think that should be soon, we'll also touch base with business organizations there and see if between us, America, whoever the host is in 2027, we can establish some sort of mechanism to track implementation. Something is not being implemented, why it's not being implemented, continue to engage the G20 governments. And we need to do that because the B20, in fact, neither the B20 nor the G20 has a permanent secretariat. So essentially, the host country does what it wants to do. So we do want to ensure that the recommendations are implemented. We are on track to hand over the recommendations to our president early in September, and then we'll use the rest of September to advocate for those recommendations. And we'll talk to G20 governments, we'll talk to our government through structures we've created, and we'll spend 2 months advocating for those recommendations to be accepted.
So from your perspective, I know that BRICS has grew by 70% within South Africa over the past couple of years, but the biggest question everyone has to ask is who's really benefiting? Is it big corporations or small businesses? What's the untapped opportunity in your opinion from, being in the B20? How does it influence the markets in today's world?
Well, the benefit should be across the board. And we had a big discussion at the B20 about SME development and women empowerment. And there were some that were of the view that we need to have separate task forces for those. Not of that view. I believe that if you have a task force for SMEs, what usually happens is SMEs sit on the task force, they discuss those issues, their issue then doesn't go anywhere after that. So we've ensured that every task force in the B20 hard codes discussion on SME development and women empowerment. And so when the recommendations come out, I want to see how this recommendation will actually enable SME development and women empowerment as well. so that they are in the center of the discussion. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is that the B20 gives us the opportunity to bring together C-suite people from the B20 countries as well as business organizations to share experiences, to share what business feels the regulatory environment should be and so on. And the recommendations have a lot of research behind them and a lot of work behind them. I think it's up to each of the B20 countries. So it's up to South Africa to then take those and see how they apply those in South Africa. And if there's good recommendations coming out on SME development and so on, then have we got those in South Africa? If not, can we apply those in South Africa? So it's not the B20 that will be doing this. It will be each of the countries that will be doing this, because the B20 moved from here to America and then to some other place in 2027. As I say, it doesn't have a secretariat. So each country should take those recommendations into the country and implement those recommendations. And I think that, so for instance, in South Africa, we've been talking a lot about making it less difficult for SMEs to actually operate. There's things like red tape issues that they need to get through. Get rid of those areas of red tape. There's issues of how they pay their taxes, so that the process of them paying their taxes does not have a negative impact on their cash flow. And how do we manage that? How do we ensure that corporates that use SMEs as service providers or buy goods from SMEs pay them in 30 days? So there's a whole lot of stuff we can do without any major changes in law. So just get rid of some of the laws. And so I think we need to look very carefully internally how we actually promote SMEs, as do other B20 countries.
Now I have a lot of pre-written questions behind the scenes, but I do want to ask person to person with B20 in the next 3 to 5 years. Personally, from where do you see B20 going or BRICS going? What's your opinion moving forward into the next 3-5 years that you'd like to share for the audience or for the viewers who are watching currently?
Well, look, I prefer not to talk about where I want to see BRICS going because I'm not really involved in the workings of BRICS currently. I used to be when I was CEO at Business B20 South Africa. But just very broadly on BRICS, I think they should be concentrating on increasing intra-BRICS trade and investment, and positioning itself as a serious bloc of countries that will enable those countries to grow, that will enable increasing intra-BRICS trade and investment, and that will play a role in global politics and global economics side by side with other blocs in both the North and the South. It's not one or the other, it's both of them. So that's what I'd like to say about BRICS. On B20, what we'd like to see is we'd like to see some success, that we are able to actually track recommendations and whether they are implemented, and lobby for as many of our recommendations to be accepted over the next 3 to 5 years. It's our job to do that. This year it will be American business' job to do that next year, and then the whole for 2020 to do that in the year after that. I'm hoping that if we want to, as we're talking to America and we'll talk to the next host, that even if it's sort of electronically or virtually, that this process enables us to develop some sort of a secretariat for the B20. And then it becomes more effective. The secretariat can actually, it's not just one country in 1 year doing its thing and then it passes over and then that country has nothing else to do after that. I think that if we have a secretariat, then that secretariat can push for those recommendations to be accepted, can track what's happening and bring back recommendations that are not being implemented. So that's the first thing. Then Brazil had also put on the table that the B20 leadership is very male-dominated. And Brazil had set a target of that by 2030, the top leadership of the B20 should be 50% men, 50% women. We've actually achieved that this year. If you look at the B20 leadership, the co-chairs, the chairs of the task forces, we've got 50% women, 50% men. So, but we'd like to continue with that, and we'd like to talk to our colleagues as they take over next year and the year after. So, and then I think that we'd like to see the B20 as a bloc, a business bloc, that actually understands that you need to open up opportunities and understand environments in which you work. So that, because if you don't understand the environments in which you work, all you see are problems and you don't see opportunities. And so open up the opportunities and environments that opportunities have not been opened up, and ensure that we do business in a way that we grow inclusive economies, that we address some of the social problems that not just South Africa has, but the world has, and allow people to prosper. And we do all of that in a cooperative world.
I cannot wait to see the B20 in the next 3 to 5 years. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Coovadia, for sharing these invaluable insights on BRICS, African economic integration, and the tangible opportunities and challenges that lie ahead. Your perspective underscores how critical collaboration, strategic positioning, and rewriting outdated trade rules are unlocking inclusive growth across the global south. To our audience, this conversation is a reminder that the future of trade and development is being shaped right now. Stay tuned for more discussions on how policy, business, and innovation intersect on the global stage. Until next time, I'm Nathan Lee Coombs, signing off.